Ian's been teaching about bees for donkey's years, and he's going to teach you some more. Benefit of his experience. Been with bees for a long time, and no doubt he'll tell you about his experience. And I think he's going to talk particularly about the difference between what things are now and how it used to be. Is that
yes,
correct?
Yeah, among other things.
Among other things. So here's Ian Brown.
Right, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. One thing I do enjoy is talking about bees. And when my wife was alive, people would say to her, "Will your husband give a talk about bees?" She said, "You'll have no trouble getting him to give a talk. The trouble you'll have is getting him to stop." And I've heard the same story from Eileen MacDonald about Bob MacDonald in Castlemaine. So you'll have to stop me when you've finished. Keeping bees. I went to school in Rugby in England, where proper football comes from. And it was during the war, 1942. I was 15-year-old. Two masters had hives on the school field because sugar was severely rationed, so some people kept bees to supplement their sugar ration. One of them was kind enough to show me in the hive, and later, which was a very rare occurrence, his wife and he asked a friend of mine and I for tea, where guess what we had? Bread and honey. And since then I was caught. Beekeeping in England was not very far forward. It was dominated by a landed gentleman by the name of Herrod-Hempshall. One of the greatest Anglophiles out. You will keep British bees and British hives. And if you lighted your smoker with other than a British match, you were letting the side down. British bees, they weren't very pleasant. They didn't produce big colonies. And most of them had been wiped out just after the First World War. There were diseases that went through Europe called acarine disease. We now know it as tracheal mite, same disease. So most of the bees we imported, I wasn't there at that time, but they imported lots of bees from the continent, and they found out that Italian bees were more resistant to acarine tracheal mite than the British bee was. The British hive, a very pretty hive, and if you only wanted one hive, it was fine. This was the WBC Hive. There was a brood box, there was a smaller honey box, and then they used to go a lot for sections. That was inside. Outside, there were 1, 2, 3 risers, plus a roof. So when you were looking at it, you had bits of hive all over the place. And to try and take it anywhere was a nightmare. At the time I thought it was great. It's only later I found out what a miserable hive it was. I loaded it all onto a handcart and pushed it about 5 miles. A friend of mine at school, his father was a farmer, and he had a field of beans. And I took it out there and managed to get one of these boxes full of honey. The first time I'd ever seen so much honey in my life. I've surpassed it later in Australia, but it was great. So I was fixed with honey. He was an odd man, Herrod-Hempshall, very good beekeeper. He got beautiful sections of honey which he showed in exhibitions and won prizes, but British beekeeping was not moving forward like the rest of the world. One or two weird things he had. If you find the queen, so that she doesn't get damaged, pick her up and hold her between your lips while you're inspecting the hive. That was one of his things. Another one was, if you've got a swarm which is too high, take your shotgun and shoot the branch off. And you know, 99% of people, certainly beekeepers, didn't have shotguns. Firearms in Britain were strictly controlled. Farmers had shotguns. If you were a coarse sportsman, you had a shotgun. But it had a reflection many, many years later in Australia. I had my bees in Heathcote, and a swarm came out, and it went way, way, way up a gum tree. I thought, how am I going to get that? In those days, you were allowed semi-automatic 2.2s. I had a semi-automatic 2.2 with telescopic sights. So bang, bang, bang. Down came the branch. Not many bees left on it. But I put a box on the few that were, and the rest of the bees went in there. So thank you, Herrod-Hempshall. I thought it was great at the time. I didn't know any better. Then I learnt of a monk in Buckfast Abbey in Devon in England. He was a lay brother. He'd come from South Germany, and he'd taken over their hives. They had several hundred hives in small apiaries around the district. And I learned from him modern beekeeping. He used American-style hives, single wall. Oh, I must go back to the WBC hive. The big frames, they weren't as big as our frames. They had a long lug on them, so single-walled hives were out. They didn't have the Hoffman shape at the end bars, so you had to put metal clips on to hold them the right distance apart. When you were extracting, it was a nightmare. Your fingers got cut taking all these clips off. So along came Herrod-Hempshall. He was up to date. He was using single-walled hives. I learned a lot from his book on the use of pheromones, the queen's pheromones in the hive. I raised queens when I had a lot of hives, and I used his method, and it worked very well. Introducing queens, very good advice he gave me. So I came up into the modern day. 1964, I migrated to Australia, and first thing, how can I keep some bees? I didn't have much of a chance. In the early 1970s, we bought a block of land. Theoretically, it's in Heathcote. It's on the outside town limits, right on the edge of the box forest. And it's 3 acres. It belonged to the man who was in charge of the crushing plant when Heathcote was a gold mining, gold producing area. And there's still evidence of him living there. We thought it was a nice looking area. What didn't realise that we were on the edge of the box forest. I immediately bought a couple of hives, a couple of nukes, and put them up there. And then added a few more and added a few more. And we used to get a honey flow. There was red gum, there was red box, there was red stringy bark, yellow gum, yellow box, white box, and grey box. White box we didn't really like. If it came at the wrong time of the year, it gave the bees tummy ache. And I've seen 2-box hives with a 4-frame nuke inside and all the other bees dead outside. Luckily, we haven't seen that for many years, but it could happen. In the 1977, I think, the company I was working for decided to go back to UK. I was left with the choice of going back to UK or taking redundancy. By that time, we liked Australia, we liked the lifestyle. My 2 sons were married to Australian girls, so we opted to stay. I was 50 years old at the time. Very hard to find a job when you're 50 years old. It took me 6 months. I found a job, it lasted 13 months. I was redundant again. So I thought, hang this for a game of soldiers. My wife was working. I'm going to retire and do odd jobs. And one of the odd jobs I did was build up the number of hives I had at Heathcote. I don't know the name of them now. If I refer to the Department of Primary Industry, you all know what I'm talking about. It changes its name more often than I change my socks. And he used to ring them and say, I live in 163 High Street, and if people rang them and said they got a swarm, they'd ring you up. Oh, there's one in the next street, there's one in the next suburb. So I started collecting swarms, taking them up to Heathcote. One night, I remember I had 4 swarms around the area to pick up. And my wife said, if you pick up any more swarms, I'm leaving. I kept picking up swarms and she never left. So I've never trusted women since then on in. But I got up to about 70, 80 hives in Heathcote. I'm getting a fair amount of honey. We were selling it to people that we knew, people I'd worked with. And I was getting more people wanting to buy honey than I had honey. I knew a commercial beekeeper called Noel Dezali, who was up Benalla. So I rang him and I said, Noel, I'm not getting much honey where I am. Do you know of any sites I can use? He said, where are you? I said, Heathcote. Oh, my godfathers, don't move from there. And I got my first intimation of grey box. Grey box, it doesn't start budding till November, and then at the end of February it flowers. And the honey just pours in, absolutely pours in. My total extraction utility was a 2-frame non-reversible extractor in my kitchen in Doncaster. So I would go up to Heathcote. I had a ute and a trailer. It would take me 2 days to fill my ute and trailer up with boxes of frames. Back down again to Doncaster. It would take me 4 days to extract it. Then back up again to Heathcote, and then back down to Doncaster. And my wife said, I've put in for my holidays middle of April. That'll be fine. Middle of April came, the middle of May came, the end of May came before grey box finally gave up. And we finished off, we had tins of honey in those days. We hadn't improved to buckets. We had tins of honey everywhere. And what are we going to do with all this honey, for heaven's sake? My wife saw in the local press that they were opening a weekend market at Warrandyte. So we were founder members there, and we used to think, if only we could sell $100 worth of honey. We're trying to get double top in darts. If only we could sell $100 worth of honey, which was pretty hard because we were selling it at 90 cents a kilo in those days. But eventually we did, and it got just too good a thing. We had to give it up. We were racing home, washing more bottles. You were allowed to recycle bottles in those days. So we gave it up, and we started getting rid of it in other ways. And I remember one grey box flow. It started, and by that time, at the back of the garage at Heathcote, I'd got a 9-frame extractor, and I used to extract my honey there. And it just kept coming in and coming in. You could put an 8-frame box on with full-depth frames, foundation, and in a week, 7 days, they'd drawn it out, filled it, and capped it, ready to take off. And it went on week after week after week. We used to spend 2 days down in Melbourne, wash ourselves, wash our clothes, back to Heathcote again, extracting. And you got so sick of extracting, you got so sick of honey. If I never see another drop of honey, it'll be too soon. Looking back now, 20 or 30 years on, they were halcyon days. We used to get, at times, 10 tons of honey. And I was selling it to Redpaths, Gordon Redpath in those days. I had 2 44-gallon drums, and I would fill those with honey. 2 of them made about half a ton of honey. I had a 1-ton flat tray, and with those 2 drums on the back, you had to look 200 meters ahead to see what the traffic lights were doing. Because 50 meters ahead, you weren't going to stop, buddy. And I've still got the drums, but I'm out of that now. Somebody may know Paul Davis of Heathcote Honey. He became a good friend of mine. He bought 25 colonies off me, and that year we had a great honey flow, and he paid for his colonies by the honey he got in from the colonies he'd bought off me. He has since taken over my hives and still keeps them on the same property. My son has now taken over, but this year he had something very similar. He started off with red box in the spring, then yellow box, then red gum, then grey box showed up. Grey box started flowering, and he was just about on his knees with grey box when white box came out. And white box this year, fingers crossed, it didn't affect the bees at all. So he was up here in honey, and having got rid of that, now he's got messmate on his hands. So you get to the point where you just don't want to see any more honey. I keep saying to him, Paul, don't worry, in 20 years' time you'll look back on these days. So that's the story of my life in beekeeping. Learned many things over the years. Somebody was talking about, well, the president, I think, was talking about bad-tempered bees. I had Caucasian bees, so gentle. My wife hated bees. She was scared to death of them. I started off with Caucasian bees. I used to order them from a man north of Melbourne, and every worker that hatched out was black with a grey band. You never got any orange bands. They were pure Caucasians, and so gentle. My name's Brown, but I've got a yellow streak down my back. I don't like getting stung. So I would wear a veil, but roll my sleeves up and get stuck into the bees. One or two of them were bad-tempered, so you wore gloves. But the rest of them, you just didn't wear gloves. If they stung you, they apologized. And in those days, before the Varroa scare, they could import Caucasian bees from the Caucasus. So he kept his breeding stock well up. And he obviously had his mating well under control, because you just never saw other than a Caucasian bee hatch out. One day I opened one of the hives. The first bee out stung me. Hey, watch it. The next bee out stung me. It was on grey box. And when they were on grey box, they weren't very happy at all. Messmate has exactly the same. And the worst of all is if honey's pouring in, then suddenly it stops. The gentlest hive are as ferocious as tigers. And I've seen Paul Davis and I have load his trailer up with combs of honey, get in his car and drive half a kilometre down the road before we could get out and take our veils off. They are ferocious. While honey's coming in, yes, help yourself. But when the honey stops, keep your hands off that. That's ours.
Just one.
Yep.
There's a photo of your wife there.
Yep.
On the screen, without any long sleeves on. I think that was very.
She hasn't even got a veil on. It's thrown back.
Yeah.
This is my wife, who scared to death of bees. She didn't like them, and they were Caucasian bees. Not a very good photograph, unfortunately, but I convinced her, look, they're not going to hurt you. And there she is. Open box of bees, full of bees, and that's what Caucasian bees were like. You can't get them anymore. There are people, one breeder, who specializes in Caucasian bees. I ordered bees from him, and half of them are Italian father, not mother. The mother's Caucasian, but the father was Italian. So I've just given up now. If I go for purebred bees, I'd go for Italians, or I just take what comes along. So that was my life in beekeeping. Changed a great deal now over the years. I've learnt many things that I wouldn't do. And things have changed so much. There weren't as many people in beekeeping. Now you seem to get people, oh, they're honeybees. I'll get a hive of bees and I'll have honey for the rest of my life. And then, oh dear, there's a hive there. All you've got to do is run down the garden and turn a tap. And there's so many people keeping bees who haven't got the faintest idea. I'll excuse all you all look intelligent. But this year I had 2 people in a club I belong to. They didn't even know what a swarm was. One of them rang me up. The bees are all over the garden. That'll be a mating flight, will it? No, that'll be a swarming flight. Next day, somebody rang up. Oh, it's frightening. My bees are all out of the hive flying around. Don't worry, they'll settle in a minute. Yes, they've settled. Well, do you know how to get them in? No. So at my age, I had to get in my car and go around, collect his swarm for him. He hadn't got any gear to put it in. And then the third one was a man who knew what a swarm was, but didn't have the faintest idea what to do with it. It's hanging there in a tree. So I had to go over to his place, get a box, knock it in. So there are so many people now that don't know about beekeeping. The state government produced apiary control, apiary code of practice, biosecurity code of practice. They're talking to people, many people that don't know a drone from a worker. They wouldn't know worker brood from honeycomb. It worries me. If Varroa came in, it could just march through. So I'll change to a happier subject now. I found out over the years that 8-frame full-depth boxes were fine, but as I got older, if I picked a box full of honey, my eyes crossed and my voice went up an octave. So I'm getting off them now. This is a full depth frame. I started using this as a honey frame. This is WSP. There is no reason why you can't use this right through your hive. It's very useful if you've got the same sized frame through your hive. You can swap from a honey super into a brood super. So at my age, I'm gradually trying to get my hives into this shape. I don't have much luck because somebody borrows a box and then I find I've got to use a full depth box. But certainly for ladies, I would recommend this. A full depth box, 8 frames, a WSP box, 8 frames full of honey. A lady can pick it up. Even I can pick it up. So, have a think about it. Talking about Brother Adam, I go back. He used 1 brood box, but this is modified Dadant or jumbo. There's a full depth one. He used 1 box. The hive was square and it held 12 of these. And in English conditions, that gave him enough room in the brood box that he didn't get much swarming. He was also in process of developing a strain of bees called the Buckfast bee. It did get worldwide recognition. Unfortunately, the poor man is dead now, and Buckfast Abbey aren't so interested in their beekeeping. But that's what he used. I tried it. It was fine. You only had to use 1 box. Very easy to look through. You only had 10 frames to look at instead of, if you got a double box, 20 frames. But I found out that, first of all, this one, and then later on this one was the better thing to use. Never used this for honey. You'd have needed a block and tackle to lift the boxes off. He used a very similar frame to the WSP for honey. It has an American name, I think, but the WSP is exactly the same. The other funny one, going back to the early days with Herrod-Hempshall, nobody would use more than one brood box. No, no, no. We don't want bees, we want honey. It had never struck them that if they haven't got bees, they're not going to get honey. And even as late as about 10 years ago, I have a good friend, a beekeeper in Somerset in England, quite well known in the craft, and he'd written a booklet on experiments in using a shallow frame above a deep frame, and they really thought they were getting into unknown country. I've found out, and probably you have, that a good fertile queen needs more than one full depth box. Doesn't quite need two, but it needs more than one full depth box. And this again is where this comes in. 2 8-frame boxes of this is ample for a queen. So the one thing, who's got small hive beetle?
Everyone.
For this alone, you'll be happy for me. I went through those 3 hives, not one small hive beetle. So this is a floorboard I've used for many years. Instead of a 10mm riser, it's a 25mm riser, and inside there's a tunnel of metal. I think it's 175mm of metal. The entrance is 200mm by 10mm, and it stays like that summer and winter. I will modify that. If it's only a very weak hive here, 3 or 4 frames, I would block most of that off so that it could defend itself. If there was any robbing, again, I would block that off until the robbing stopped. But apart from that, it's wide open summer and winter. These are sturdy insects, you know, they're developed to stand European conditions. They're downside colder than here. When small hive beetle came, I noticed that among other things, they tried to hide under the hive mat. So the next thing I did, I got rid of hive mats. I've had a board like this for a long time, very useful, but among other things, I have no hive mat. I have this on top of the hive, and underneath I put 3mm spacers. That might not sound much, 3mm, but when you add it up all the way around the perimeter of that board, it equates to a hole 100mm by 50mm, or if you're used to the old money, 4 inches by 2 inches. That's a fair-sized hole to let all that moist, warm air out. One hive came through the winter with this, no small hive beetle. The other 2 hives, as soon as I'd got them settled in their hives, one of these went on the top with the spacers, no small hive beetle. I have my fingers crossed that I might have radically reduced chalk brood as well. So if I've done nothing else, that's the way to get rid of your small hive beetle, okay? This sits on top of the box. Yeah. I use 3mm galvanized nails. It's as crude as that. I put one there, one there, and one there. And then one there, one there, and one there. And the bees respect it. They don't appear to propolize it.
Inside the lid.
Sorry?
That's inside the lid. So you can't see that from the outside of the hive.
No, you've got a roof on.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. You can see this piece from the outside of the hive, and you can see the nails sticking out. But long time I've been trying after upper ventilation. When I was big time at Heathcote, I would store my empty combs on top of one of these boards, and the bees used to caretake them. Quite often, I would get mouldy combs. Once I started top ventilation, mouldy combs are gone. My bees they're very healthy, certainly no small hive beetle, and I have my fingers crossed that I've either radically reduced or got rid of chalk brood.
I'm just saying, what did you have before?
Oh, just the ventilation holes in the lid.
So they,
Yeah,
so you had to
and I mean, they're a joke. If you put the gauze on the inside, the bees fill it up with propolis. If you put the gauze on the outside, they don't fill it up with propolis, but if you put your finger in the wrong place, you get stung. They're still there, you know, they look pretty, but this is where I get rid of the foul air. I listen to people, sorry, I'll be with you in a sec. I listen to people, oh, winter's coming on. Don't forget, put folded newspaper in the top of the hive, keep all that heat in. No, let all that heat out together with the moist air. Get rid of it. Okay? You've got two choices. You can either follow that or do it your own way. Anybody get troubled with wasps around their hives? First of all, wasps would nip in, grab some honey and out again. Also, the bees don't like to build the comb without this, with just a plain opening. The bees will cut away the comb near the entrance. The bees with this will build the comb right down into the bottom of the frame. A wasp comes in, you've got to run 175 millimeters gauntlet of bees attacking it. There are easier ways of finding a living, so it goes. Same with robber bees. A cold wind doesn't blow directly in the entrance. It only wants about a dozen bees in there, and they've cut the cold wind off. I started using it maybe 30 years ago, and I've seen no reason to change. I have tried it with the plastic slotted hive, the blue bees hive. It's okay, but I still prefer this one. But this is it, you know, there's this entrance, summer and winter, so that the bees are breathing, they're producing moisture, their body heat, the brood temperature is roughly our blood temperature. You've got moist, humid conditions there, just what the small hive beetle are looking for to breed. Yes, I had to make these. All it is, instead of 10 millimeters, which is the usual riser, this is 25 millimeters. And I don't know whether I can... Oh. Here, piece of sloping wood on each side, and then put that on and just some nails to jam it on. I generally put a piece of wood there because this metal is very thin, and if it were to bend down like that, it would restrict the bees. But with that, it stays at that distance.
Stop saying.
Yes. The lady is asking about keeping ants out of a hive. I had a friend, he lived on the sand belt of Melbourne, and he was absolutely riddled with ants. So he had an ice cream container under each leg of his hive with water in all the time. But yes, oil will do. If you can wrap sticky tape, sticky side out, that will deter them. Up at Heathcote, I used to follow them to the nest. Sometimes the nest was twice the length of this room, and then kill the nest. You can buy ant sand and put a circle way outside. Yeah, they are a nuisance. A few small ants I don't bother about, but once you, up at Heathcote, I had a trail of ants from a nest to the hive, grabbing stuff in a way. So it took me about a quarter of an hour to track them across the field. And then I dug the nest up, poured some insecticide in. I probably shouldn't have done, but they were my bees. I didn't meet him. For years we used to go back to England and rely on relatives to take us around. finally we decided to hire cars. And I got down to Buckfast Abbey, and poor brother Adam had been bitten by an insect, not a bee, and he was in hospital. And very soon afterwards he died. So that was one of my failures in life. But I have got his book, I think Beekeeping at Buckfast, I think it's called. And it's also autographed by brother Adam. So, look, he was a great influence in my life. He got me back from Herrod-Hempshall's ancient way to the modern way of beekeeping. Okay? Thank you.
Thanks, Ian, and there's a little gift for you. Thank you for coming along. So, very good. Well, cup of tea, and
that's fine.
If there's more questions that you throw in, and I'm sure Adam will, Ian will be happy.
Yeah, I'll be happy. Thank you very much.